Hey there, let's talk about opacity and keyframes. So I have this square here, and I'm going to quickly show you how to create a transition with keyframes. So I'm going to bring up my opacity by clicking on this layer and pressing T, and then I'm just going to set a keyframe at 1 second with 100% opacity. And I'm going to go to 0 seconds and change this opacity to 0. So there you can see I've already created a fade. So I'm going to move this over so that we can really see how this works. So there we have our square fading in. I can copy this keyframe and go a little bit further and copy this keyframe, and now we have a square that fades in and fades out. So let me show you a nice little effect you can do with some text. So here I'm going to write, we'll say video school online, and I'm going to change the font to motor oil, which is the font I use for my title. Keep it like that. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. You can either select the layer and copy and pasting it, or you can just press Command D with it selected, or Control D on a PC. I'm going to move it down. I'm going to say make better videos. And this top one I'm going to make all caps, so I select it and press all caps down here. So now it's all caps. And this one I'm going to make a little bit smaller, and I'll just right justify it. So put it, not necessarily right justify it in the paragraph settings, but just align it with the right side of Video School Online. Alright, so I'm going to go to 1 second and then select both and press T to bring up opacity, and then click the stopwatch, and you can see that it creates a keyframe for both layers. I'm going to go back, make sure I have both selected, and press 0, so now we have a fade for both. I'm going to take this opacity for Make Better Videos and move it to right when the first Video School Online fades in. And then at 4 seconds, I'm going to select both, set a keyframe for 100% opacity. Click this diamond over here on the left, and then go to 5 seconds, select both, and set it at 0. So now we have our title fade up, the subtitle fade up, and then they both fade out together. So I'm going to move both these layers actually over. Here I'm actually moving the whole layer and not just the keyframes, so that there's a little bit of black space in front. Video School Online, Make Better Videos, fade out. So that's a nice kind of effect you can do with fades. We can make these fades longer by, I can even select both of these keyframes at the same time by selecting one and shift and dragging over the second one, pressing shift and dragging over the second one, and then dragging these over to the right so that there's more time in between the keyframes. We can speed up this fade out like so, fade in, and fade out. Cool, so that's how you create an opacity transition in After Effects with keyframes, about adding a rotation change with keyframes. So basically we're going to be creating rotation. So I have this letter X on my composition, and I'm just going to bring up my rotation function. So press R to bring that up, and then I'm just going to create a slow rotation across 5 seconds. So I'm going to set the stopwatch here, go to 5 seconds, and then we'll say we'll add 90 degrees, so it's going to rotate 90 degrees. So there we have a slight rotation of the X. Maybe we want something, maybe we want the X to be just completely spinning, so I'm going to increase it, a few times. So I can just actually, with the rotation, you see the 0x plus 0.0 degrees. So 0x means how many full rotations, and then plus how many degrees. If you just do 10x, that's going to do 10 rotations in 5 seconds. So that's a pretty good spin right there. So you can create a cool optical illusion like that. It looks almost like there's a star in the middle of this X. So there you can create a rotation that way. So say you have an image of a wheel or something and you want it to spin, you can do it like that. Let me show you what you can do with some text. So I'm going to just say rotation, decrease the size of this, and then I'm going to move the, make this left justified. So the anchor point is now on the left. And actually I'm going to make this even bigger. So say I want to basically rotate this off the screen into the screen. This is going to be my final position. So I'm going to, at 1 second, bring up the rotation by pressing R, set the keyframe, go back half a second, and rotate it to the left. And we almost have it off screen, but not quite. So what we can do is, I'm actually going to delete this. I'm going to move this anchor point even further away from the rotation text off screen. So when we add a rotation keyframe, so here we have 0 rotation, this is our final position, and then we rotate it off screen, it's off of the screen because it's anchored to that point right there. So now we have this text coming in. So that's kind of a cool thing you can do with text. Imagine like having multiple of these, rotating in and out. So I'll show you that quickly. So I'm going to duplicate this, but I'm going to just take off this rotation that we have already, move it up. I'll duplicate it one more time. I'm pressing Command D to duplicate. This one actually, so I'm going to bring up the keyframes for this one, so press R. Another quick thing you can do is, if you have a layer selected, you can press U on your keyboard, and that brings up all the keyframes that you've added to this layer. So if you have multiple, if you have rotation, position, opacity keyframes, or more, you can see all of them by pressing U. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to go to 1 second, 1.5 seconds, and paste it to this top rotation text. I'm going to go back to 1 second, and for this middle one, I want it to rotate the other way. So I want it to rotate, the R goes from up top right and then rotates down. So I want this to be, the anchor point to be on the right side. So I'm going to take the pan behind tool, move this over to the right side. I'm going to bring up R, set the rotation here. Actually, I'm going to move that to 1.5 seconds, and then rotate it 90 degrees off screen. So now we'll have these kind of like slamming down. So, obviously you wouldn't use the text rotation, but if you're creating a music video or something like that, this would be kind of cool. So, let's see, what could you say? School is cool. School is cool. So that's kind of backwards, but cool is school as well. So I think you get the point how to add rotation or about something called Keyframe Assistant. So basically, up until now, when we're playing with keyframes, the speed of things is basically linear. It just goes from A to B at whatever speed you set your keyframes to. So for example, I have this position, this speed text. I'm going to have it go from off screen to on screen with position keyframes. So it's a steady speed the whole time. One thing we can do is use a Keyframe Assistant to change that. So if you right click a keyframe, you'll see this Keyframe Assistant option, and you have this thing called Easy Ease. And what does Easy Ease mean? It means that it will basically ease into the second keyframe, whatever it is, if it's position or if it's rotation or change in size or opacity. It means it will kind of start off fast and then slow into this keyframe so that it's not an abrupt stop. And when you do click it, you will see this kind of hourglass figure. So let me show you what this looks like. So see how it kind of slowly comes in. Let me make it a little bit faster so you can see it. Speed kind of slows to a stop there. I'll turn on motion blur to make it seem a little bit more natural. So there you can really tell that it slows to a stop. Whereas if you didn't have this, and if you didn't have Easy Ease on, you can get rid of it by pressing Command and clicking on the keyframe itself. It just comes in and it kind of stops abruptly. So it's a cool thing to use to kind of make your motions a little bit more natural, and just your animations a little bit more natural and give it a little bit more flow. So if you have this speed text coming in and then going out, you can also use something called Easy Ease In and Easy Ease Out. And it basically means that it's easing in on one side of the keyframe. So right click and add Easy Ease In, so it will ease in to this keyframe, and then it will also ease. You can do ease out of this keyframe if you don't want it to ease in on both sides of the keyframe. I know that's kind of confusing, but I hope you get it. So it kind of eases in and then it slowly eases out. Usually I just use Easy Ease because it basically does the same thing. So I'll do Easy Ease for both of these. Eases in, eases out. And you can use this for rotation, opacity, for any keyframe that you have. You can use the Easy Ease function. Creating shapes. Shapes are one of the backbones of After Effects and creating motion graphics. And so we're going to go through all the different ways that you can create shapes and all sorts of things that have to do with shapes, masks, and that sort of thing. So let's get straight to it. Make sure you're watching this in HD and in full screen. So first we're going to talk about creating a shape with the Shape tool. It's this tool up here. It looks like a rectangle. If you click and hold it, you will see that it has some different options. The hotkey is Q. So if you're on your pointer and you press Q on your keyboard, the Shape tool will come up, and you can scroll through these shapes by just pressing Q. Say, let's do a rectangle. All you have to do is select the rectangle, select your color, and then click and drag. And that's basically how you create a basic shape. Same goes for if you want a circle or polygon or really anything. Any of these shapes. Rectangle with rounded edges. But there's a couple things to keep in mind when you are creating your shape. If you just click and drag, you can make it whatever width and whatever height you want. But if you want to have it symmetrical, you would click, and while you're clicking, hold the shift key down. And that creates, well, obviously for a rectangle, a symmetrical rectangle is a square. So that will create a perfect square. For example, for a circle, instead of doing an oval, if you press shift, it locks it to a perfect circle. So that's pretty cool. Another thing you can do is when holding down, when clicking and dragging, if you press shift and command, it basically creates a circle from where you started clicking. So you'll see here, if you want a circle directly in the middle of your page, turn on your title action safe, put your pointer right in the middle where this crosses, click it, press command and shift on a Mac, I believe it's control and shift on a PC, and then drag out. And you can see here, now I have a perfect circle starting from the middle of my screen. So that's perfectly in the middle right now. Say you want to change the color. All you have to do is go back up to fill up here and choose a new color. There you have it. Another thing you can do with these shapes is actually just double click the shape right here and it will fill the entire composition with that shape. So for example, for a circle, it will create an oval as big as it can. For star, it will create a star. That didn't create as big as it can, but I've never actually created a star that way. So I guess it depends on what shape you're using. So that is pretty much all you have to know. Another thing is, if you don't want to create a perfect square from where you start clicking, where you press shift and control, if you don't want a perfect square, you can just press the command or control button, depending on if you have a Mac or a PC. And see here, I can create, all sorts of shapes that way. And that's pretty much it. One thing to keep in mind though too is to create a more unique shape, you can create a shape once and then continue to create more shapes off of this if you want. And that's one way to basically create interesting shapes. And you'll see as I add shapes to this one layer, all the shapes are coming up here down in our timeline. And you can delete them if you want to add different shapes or whatever. So that is how you create some custom shapes with the shape tool. Next time we're going to be talking about using the mask tool to create shapes, which is actually the way I prefer to create shapes, and you'll see why in future lessons, but it gives you a lot more flexibility when creating motion and things like that. About creating shapes with the mask tool. And I suggest using the mask tool to create your shapes because in the future we'll talk about creating motion with the masks and changing shapes with the mask tool, and it just gives you a lot more flexibility with the mask rather than using the shape tool. And it's hard to explain now, and it basically just takes practice and seeing why, and you'll see in the future, but just trust me on that topic. I hope you guys are having a great day. So let's get straight into it. So to create a shape with a mask tool, what you're going to want to do is go up to Layer, New, Solid, or press Command Y if you're on a Mac. It will ask you what size and what color. The size is it basically automatically uses the size of your composition. So let's pick a color. We'll pick this nice kind of turquoise color. And then you take the shape tool, but instead of creating a shape, we're going to create a mask from this layer. So make sure this layer is selected, and then click and drag. And so now we have a rectangle. And it's, you might be saying, why is that different than what we did before? But it is different. We can customize it in different ways. We can add points to it. For example, with the pen tool, I'll go into this in the more in the future, but we can create custom shapes this way. So this is a lot better for creating custom shapes, I would say, using the mask tool. So okay, so we can delete that mask, and I'll show you. Basically you have the same options, creating circles or ovals, and just like with the creating the shapes in the last lesson, if you press Shift while you're clicking and dragging, you create a perfect circle. If you press Command, you will create a circle from the point where you clicked. If you press Command and Shift while you have this layer selected, so click, Command, Shift, it will create a perfect circle from the center of where you clicked. And same with if you click the shape tool up here, it will create a masked shape out of that. And that's pretty much it. So just like I showed you before, if you create your shape and then you want to edit it, you can use your pointer, your selection tool, and move it around, or click inside the shape and then move the corners, or click the sides and move them around, in or out. If you click side and press Shift and slide it back and forth, it will lock it to this axis so it doesn't go up or down and create non-right angles. You can also, if let's see, if you select the shape inside, you can select multiple corners by clicking and dragging, like so. And so there's lots of ways to customize your shapes. One thing you might want to do is change the anchor point to the center of your shape. So just eyeballing it right now, you can use it with the pan behind tool. And this way, if you change the size of your shape, or the rotation, it rotates and has a changing size coming from this anchor point. So that's how you create a shape with a mask. Do the mask tool. So we're gonna create a new layer. I press Command Y to do that, and then I'm gonna use my shape tool to create a nice circle. So I click and hold down Command and Shift and create this nice circle. You'll see that this mask appears down here, and there's all sorts of things that you can do with it. You can select this inverted mark right here, box right here, and it will invert the shape. So now you have a circle within a square. You can also do that by doing subtract right here. And there's some other things that other, I guess, transfer modes right here that you can play with too. To the left of the mask, you will have a drop down triangle, so go ahead and click that, and here are the three options that I want to show to you. So make sure you have it on add or subtract to see what I'm doing, and I hope you're following along. So if you click path, this is basically means what is the mask path right here, and you have you basically have your points and the line that connects those points. Mask feather, this is if you want to feather it out, so go ahead, you can increase the pixels and create a feather effect, so that could be super interesting. You can decrease the mask opacity or increase it, and you can do a mask expansion, so decrease it or increase it, and this is just if you want to fine-tune your mask. So what are some practical applications of this? For one, you can create awesome vignettes this way. So let me go ahead and delete this. I'm going to create a new layer solid, and I'm going to make it black to create our vignette. Then I'm just going to double click this, our circle shape or our oval shape, and it creates that. I'm going to switch this to subtract, so now you can see we already have the beginnings of our vignette. I'm going to drop down the mask menu. You can also press MM on your keyboard to bring it up. I'm going to increase this feathers, and then I'm going to decrease the opacity. And there you can see we have like a nice vignette. I'll turn it on and off for you to see. So vignettes are nice to add to your videos to draw the attention of the viewer to the center of your video. So that's one practical application of using these mask edit effects. Let's do another shape, and I'll show you what else you can do. All these things you can edit by keyframe, and just like we've edited the size, position, rotation before. And we will go more into all of that stuff in the next few lessons, but just know you can create keyframes for each of these effects right here. So those are the different ways to change and edit your mask. I hope you enjoyed. Go and create some cool snowball effects or something like that. One thing I want to mention though to you too is to change the color of a mask. It's a little bit different, or of a solid. You can't just go up and click this fill button. What you have to do is go to Layer Solid Settings, or press Shift Command Y if you're on a Mac, and then you can choose a new color, just like that. Click OK. So that's kind of a cool little ball right there. Today I want to talk to you about creating shapes with the pen tool. So I'm going to start a new layer, Command Y. We'll choose, how about like a yellowish orange color. Something like that is nice. Okay, okay. Wow, that is bright. So now I want to use my pen tool. Hotkey is G on your keyboard to bring that up. And now all you have to do is basically click, make sure you have your layer selected, or it will try to create a shape. So select your yellow solid, click, 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 whatever shape you want to make, and then close your shape. And now you have a cool shape. That is pretty awesome. It looks like a weird sort of lightning bolt, saw. It could be someone's hairdo. I don't really know. Press M to bring up the mask. I can delete that. So let's try something else. So what you can do is click, drag, click and drag, and this creates curves. Click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. And after you click and drag, you can change these little these bars that come off each point. You can play with those to affect the curve. Go back, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. Now we have like an amoeba some sort of bacteria forming. So that is pretty cool. You can also add more masks. Again, make sure you have your layer selected. So I'm going to create another shape within this, and this is really to basically create cutouts out of this shape. So you can change this to subtract and create a shape within that shape. So that's pretty cool stuff. Use your pen tool to create new masks and create curves, and just play around with it. You're gonna have lots of fun if you're just trying, and that's all. Learning how to animate these masks and create some cool motion effects with them. So let's get right into it. So as you remember, last time we were learning about how you use creating a new solid to create a mask. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Let's create a nice blue solid right here like this. We got the same size of our composition, and that's perfect. Now I'm going to take my rectangle tool, and I'll just use that for an example. And say we want to create some sort of bar that goes across the screen. Well, first we have to create that bar, so I'm just going to click and drag with the shape tool to create this mask. I'll do it about to there. As you can see here down in the timeline, the mask pops up. So now we have a mask that we can edit. Like we said before, you can edit this by using these transfer modes. You can have it add or subtract, but today we're going to keep it at add. By pressing MM on your keyboard, you get these mask properties that pop up. First, we want to make sure we click our mask, and then we want to go to 1 second. So say this is our final bar right here. This is the size of the bar at the final point of the animation. So we're going to click the stopwatch next to mask path. So I'm going to click that, and that creates a keyframe at 1 second. I'm going to go back to about 1/4 of a second, and now I'm going to edit this mask. The way I'm going to do this is going to use the selection tool, and I'm going to double click the edge of the mask, and this brings up this sort of these editing options, this bar around, this box around the mask that we can edit. I'm just going to click the middle of this box on the right and move it all the way to the left. And so now our mask basically grows into this bar. So let's render it out and see what it looks like. So that's looking pretty good. What I want to do is add a blur, motion blur effect so that it looks a little bit more natural as it's coming out. And maybe even increase the speed a little bit. So maybe I'll move this first keyframe to about 1/2 second. So the entire animation takes 1/2 second rather than 3/4 of a second. And something that like that looks really nice. And then from here, you can animate some text on, make some text fade on or off or something like that. And that is one example of how you would animate a mask. Let's do another example. So let's start a new layer. So I press Command Y on my keyboard for the hotkey for that option. We'll do a nice magenta pink circle. So I'm going to get my circle selection, ellipse tool. I'm going to click in the middle, and while holding Command and Shift, drag out, and now I have a perfect circle coming in from the center of my composition. So now we have this circle. This time I want to animate the mask, but animate using the mask expansion function. So I'm going to go to 1 second, click the stopwatch to set a keyframe for there, and then go back to about 1/2 second. And then I'm going to decrease the mask expansion. As you can see, as I decrease the pixels, the circle gets smaller and smaller. So there I have a circle popping up into our composition. And this one maybe make a little bit faster as well. Add motion blur to make it look a little bit more natural. Now we have this cool circle happening. And then remember a few lessons ago I was talking about adding a little bit of bounce to your animations, which creates a little bit more flow and makes it feel a little bit more natural. We can do that. So our final mask expansion point for this keyframe, as you can see, is 0 pixels. We want to make it a little bit larger, so we're going to make it about 15 pixels, or we'll try 25 pixels, about 2 frames in front of our last keyframe. Now we'll render this out, and this circle kind of bounces in. So now I'm going to edit this keyframe using Keyframe Assistant and add easy ease. Oops, let's do easy ease. And this is kind of what we were doing when we were playing with the size animations in the size animations lesson. But this way we're doing it with masks. So now we have this nice circle bouncing in, and again, this will be part of another animation. You can add text going across or something like that, or add more balls popping up. You could use this mask as an image, and that's something that we haven't talked about yet. So, mask shapes aren't just for doing solid colors. Say you have an image, so let's say this brick wall, but we want a ball in the form of a brick wall. So we select our ellipse tool, and then we just click and drag. I'm holding shift to get a perfect circle. Now we have a circle brick of bricks. And then we can add an animation that way. So let's see what we can do here. So say this is our starting mask. We'll click the stopwatch, go forward, we'll edit this mask by clicking on, if you click off of the layer and then you click the layer bar down here in the timeline, you can edit these individual points. So we can make this ball maybe stretch. And then I'm going to go forward a little bit and copy and paste this first keyframe to make it go back into our ball shape. So that's just an animation showing you the different options for animating masks. I mean, eventually you could turn the circle into a square or something like that. That would be kind of cool. First, let's bring in the sidewalk texture, or bring in any texture that you want that you find online. I'm going to decrease the size of this like so, and then I'm going to use the ellipse tool to create a circle, a perfect circle from the inside. So I'm pressing Command and Shift to create a perfect circle. Then I'm going to actually do another circle. So I'm going to go from the center again, pressing Command and Shift on my Mac keyboard. On a PC, it is Control and Shift. And now I have this inner mask. And now for this mask 2 down here, I'm going to say subtract, so that it leaves this hole in the middle of this mask. So what I want to do is kind of create this circle expanding, or this empty circle expanding inside. So it looks like an O that's expanding. So first thing first, I want to make my starting point for my animation. I'm going to select both masks and press MM to bring up my mask properties. For mask 2, the starting point is going to be really in the middle. So I want to decrease the mask expansion until this is in the middle and it's a solid circle. So something like that is perfect. So I'm going to create a keyframe right there. For this mask 1, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to start out at 0, or at where there's no texture at all. So there's nothing on the screen, so something like that. I'm going to go forward. We'll go forward about half a second. I'm going to increase the mask expansion for this first mask. So this goes to about here, where it is. So I can actually just type 0 in for 0 pixels, so that reaches the mask boundary. And then for this first one, I'm going to actually increase to 0 as well. So let's look what this looks like. See what this looks like right there. So we got this mask expanding. Maybe what I want to do is have the circle up here and then the inner mask kind of appears. So something like this. That's kind of cool. So the circle appears, and then with the second mask, it kind of makes the circle disappear. So maybe I'll have this expand actually further out until there is no sphere left. So something like that. So the circle appears, and this can be part of another animation. So I'm going to make this second animation a little bit faster, so I'm going to move in this keyframe. I'm going to make these two keyframes in the middle easy ease. So I'm going to right click, Keyframe Assistant, easy ease. So maybe something like that is cool. I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to select both, press U to bring up all the keyframes. And on this bottom layer, I'm just going to move it a little bit. So as this first one is disappearing, the second animation is kind of appearing in the middle. I'm going to change the color of this. We'll talk more about effects, but I can do hue up here in the effects bin, hue saturation, drag it onto this layer, and then just rotate the master hue. May add this, decrease the saturation, or the master lightness. I guess since this is basically a black and white image, we're not going to get to change the hue that much. But we can click this colorize button and increase the saturation, decrease the lightness. So now we have this blue circle appearing. So let's see what this looks like. So that's kind of cool. May make it a little bit earlier. You see this a lot in the motion graphics nowadays. It's a cool effect for some kinetic typography or just motion graphics. You know, shapes appearing or disappearing. So that's kind of a cool effect, and that's just, I'm showing you how you can edit multiple masks within the same layer. So that's the start of a cool animation. 3D in After Effects. And 3D is a cool thing about After Effects. You can do a lot of cool 3D animations with After Effects. So it's, you know, a lot of fun, but it can be slightly confusing. So get ready for some intense lessons. Pay attention, and as always, watch in full screen and in HD to get the best viewing experience. So first, in this lesson, I'm going to give you an introduction to what 3D really means in After Effects. And I'm going to show you by giving you an example using this dog PNG that I downloaded from Google. So of course, if you're using images from Google for your final projects or any commercial projects, you got to make sure that you get permission from the artist or that you purchase from an image site or something like that. But for this tutorial, or if you're just practicing, go ahead and find a cool image online that you want to practice with. So to turn on 3D, all you have to do is click this box underneath this 3D cube, and this turns on 3D layer. As soon as you do that, you can see that a couple options pop up underneath to format this image. But first, I want to go through 3D position. When you press P or bring up position underneath your layer, you will notice that there is another option. If this is off, it goes away. If this is on, it is back. So before, we just had the x-axis and the y-axis, and so by moving these numbers or changing these figures, you will be able to move your image throughout this composition via the x-axis and the y-axis, so left, right, or up or down. Now we have this new Z-axis option, which basically moves Fido, our puppy, backwards or forwards in space. So you're actually creating, a 3D environment with this. So let's put this back at 0, for example. So say I duplicate this layer, and now I have Fido 1. I'll make him a little bit bigger so we can represent him a little bit and differentiate him. We have Fido 1 in front of Fido 2, but if you bring up the position function for both, they're both on the 0.0 pixel on the Z-axis. So that's the same position on the Z-axis, but layer 1 Fido is just in front of, on top of layer 2, but it doesn't really mean in the space of this composition he's in front. It just means the layer is on top of the layer down here. So whatever's on top will appear on top. But even so, say Fido 2, our small puppy, is on top, but we move him back in Z space, he is now behind Fido number 2. And so that is how you can see how this 3D space is working. So if you move our puppies back, they will be further away from us in 3D space, or closer to us if you want to go to in the negative pixels. So that is 3D for position. I'm going to get rid of this, our dot, Fido number 2, put him back on the normal Z-axis 0.0 pixel. Now let's talk about rotation, because rotation brings up a lot of 3D options as well. So before we just had Z rotation, which was basically moving left or right, rotating kind of like a clock hand. Now we have Y rotation, which will rotate Fido on the Y axis, or we have X rotation, which will rotate Fido on the X axis. And so as you can probably tell, this brings up a whole new ballgame in terms of animating with After Effects and all the different options for animations that you can create. So those are the basics of 3D in terms of just layer 3D. You can, of course, add cameras and do all sorts of other things with 3D and in After Effects, and we're going to be talking about that in the future. But for this lesson, I just wanted you to understand the basics of what happens when you click this 3D enabled layer button right here, the cube to the right of the motion blur. So you can edit both the position and the rotation. And in the next lesson, we're going to be talking about animating these options and creating some cool effects with 3D. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.